Welcome back to St. Thomas Aquinas for everyone. I'm Dave Palmer, and we are studying the Summa. Isn't this exciting? And we have already covered so much ground. We are in Prima Secunda, the first part of the second part of the Summa now. We've covered God and the angels and human nature and man's last end and a lot of other things that are kind of thrown in there as well. And we are moving now into two teachings, two videos on man's will. Will is kind of a tricky thing to describe. Of course, will is extremely important in theology and Christianity because of that tension I've talked about often between divine providence, teleology, where God is kind of moving all things towards their end, and then will. Okay, we know we have free will. All right, we can sense that. We know we're making decisions, and we can go one of two different directions. But how does that all play into human nature and our goal of coming to know God in an intimate way in beatitude with a beatific vision? Okay, will is very, very, very important. Okay, and so this will be the first of two videos that we do about the human will, and I think you're going to enjoy it. I hope you do anyways. All right, so we move on to the first question of the first article, the eighth question of the first part of the second part of the Summa, if that makes sense. And Thomas asks whether the will is of good only. All right, is it good only? Now, here's an example I like to use. This guy appears to be stealing a car. Okay, let's just say that he's stealing a car. All right, well, is his will directed toward the good? Well, you may be surprised that Thomas is going to say, yes, in fact, it is. And here's why. Thomas says the will is a rational appetite. Now, every appetite is only of something good. Now, here's the way we know it, is that if we're drawn to something, then it's good. All right, at least it has some aspect of good, otherwise we wouldn't be drawn to it. Why would we be drawn to something that would not be good in some way, right? Like this old brown, hot fudge sundae that I've shown you. The only reason we're drawn to it is because we perceive it as being good. Now, it may or may not be good for us depending on the circumstances, circumstances, but we wouldn't be really desirous of it if there wasn't something good about it. The reason of this is that the appetite is nothing else than an inclination of a person desirous of a thing toward that thing. Okay, that makes sense. Now, every inclination is to something like and suitable to the thing inclined. Since, therefore, everything inasmuch as it is being in substance is a good, remember we talked about that, it's kind of deep, but it makes sense. Everything that God creates, everything that has existence is good. It must needs be that every inclination is to something good, and hence it is that the philosopher Aristotle says that the good is that which all desire. Okay, everybody wants to desire something, even on things like we talked about the intellectual appetite, the will. We want to graduate from college or get that dream job or get married, okay? These things that we desire with an intellectual appetite are good. They at least have to have an apparent good, because otherwise we wouldn't desire them, right? All right, so even our car thief, as I mentioned a moment ago, sees this car or that stereo or whatever he wants to steal as good. Otherwise, he's not going to risk the law and risk getting arrested unless he sees something that's good. Now, it doesn't mean it's moral, okay? That's a whole other issue. But now Thomas is going to get a little bit deep here, and so follow it here. But it must be noted that since every inclination results from a form, the natural appetite results from a form existing in the nature of things. Okay, we could probably talk about that line for the next 20 minutes, but let's move on. While the sensitive appetite also the intellective or rational appetite, the will, which we call the will, follows from an apprehended form. Okay? So, therefore, just as the natural appetite tends to good existing in a thing, remember this picture? You go to the picnic and all the ants start going towards the watermelon. Why do they do that? Because they have a natural appetite for a good. They perceive that as a good. They're not climbing all over something that they don't perceive as good, because they'd be wasting their time, right? So the animal or voluntary appetite tends to a good which is apprehended. Okay, a voluntary appetite, that means that we have a choice. That means we're not, the ants don't have a choice. They're just drawn to that watermelon because God created them that way. That's classic teleology, God moving things towards their end, right? Consequently, in order that the will tend to anything, it is requisite not that this be good in very truth, but that it be apprehended as good. Here's a picture of some medical students. They would not have entered medical school and gone through everything that they're going through if they didn't perceive something good about it. Now, they may have a different reason. Some of them may want the money. Some of them may genuinely want to help people. Some people may want to figure out illnesses to help their loved ones. Everybody has a different motive, but the motives are good, at least to them. They're perceived as being good. As Aristotle says, the end is a good or an apparent good. Okay. But anyways, I think I'm beating this to death. But does that make sense? Do you understand it? Okay. So we understand that the will is an intellectual appetite. It's something that we want that isn't connected specifically to the sensitive appetite, like a banana split or chips and salsa. But what moves the will? That's what Thomas is asking there. And he has articles in the Summa where he says, is the will moved by the intellect? This is really interesting because remember, the intellect is directed towards the truth, the true. The will is directed toward the good, but the good and the true are not necessarily different. Sometimes they're the same, right? But what's the relationship? Very, very interesting, and we'll cover more of that in the videos to come. The sensitive appetite. Is our will moved by our desire for sleep or sex or banana splits or beer or what have you? Does the will move itself? Now that's interesting. That seems kind of like cyclical, right? The will moves the will, but what moved the will, right? An exterior principle, something like God, something outside of ourselves entirely. And then also Thomas asks about a heavenly body. That would be like astrology. Are we being moved by the planets or the moon or the sun or that kind of thing? All right, these are all the things that Thomas asks in the Summa. What moves the will? What motivates us? What drives us? What gets us up in the morning? And so again, Thomas is going to say whether the will is moved by God alone as exterior principle. He says now the cause of the will can be none other than God. Okay, there's a picture of God the Father. And first, because the will is a power of the rational soul, which is caused by God alone by creation. God created us. He created our rational soul. We have wills, and so he's the guy that made it, so he's in control, right? Secondly, it is evident from the fact that the will is ordained to the universal good. All right, do you remember what the universal good is? Everybody wants to be happy. Okay, so what Thomas is going to say here is that our happiness is God. Okay, so God is our beatitude. We want to get to God, just like we want to get to the grocery store. And so the end, remember, we start with the end because then we direct our paths to it. Wherefore, nothing else can be the cause of the will except God himself, who is the universal good. While every other good is good by participation. Now, this is what I just can't stress enough. Those chips and salsa that you're really desiring at the Mexican restaurant, that is a participation in our ultimate beatitude, which is God. Okay, very few people ever make these connections. The romance that we have, the love we have, in my case, for my wife, and for you it might be a husband or a wife or a girlfriend or a boyfriend or what have you, right? That's a participation ultimately in our final end, which is God. This is what the Summa is about, okay? Teleology, epistemology, coming to know God, providence, human nature, will, intellect, appetite. It all is so fun to study. Okay, and a particular cause does not give a universal inclination. Hence, neither can primary matter. This last sentence is kind of weird. It seems like a disconnect here. Hence, neither can primary matter, which is potentiality to all forms, be created by some particular agent. Primary matter is the matter before it receives a form, right? It's a very, very interesting concept that Thomas talks about in the Summa. I'm actually not going to get into it too much because it would make this video too long if I went into it. I think I understand primary matter for the most part, but if I start explaining it, I'm going to start bumbling and fumbling, and it's not going to be pretty, okay? But anyways, so that does it. That's the will part one. We've got one more video on the will, and it will be equally as interesting as this one. If you found this one interesting, the next one's going to be interesting as well, okay? All right, that's going to do it. Thanks so much for joining me for this video. That's my son back there who just came in. God bless you, and comment, like, subscribe, and all that kind of stuff, okay? God bless you. Bye-bye.